Welcome to ACC Nation. I'm Jim Quist. Will Ogenin is taking a day, and our special guest is the publisher of Wake Up, Conor O'Neill. And thank you, Conor, for joining us, because I know you're really busy right now with Wake Forest. There's tons of stuff going on, especially with football.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jim. It is busy. Today was day 5 in a row of covering a Wake Forest practice, and we're fortunate to be past 2020 and actually be back at practice and covering them. The rug was pulled out in 2020 and we got 5 spring practices, and then spring was canceled, and then fall camp because of COVID, we couldn't cover any practices. And then in the spring earlier this year, we couldn't cover any practices. So that was a shock to the system. In these last 5 that I've seen, it's been really nice to be back out there.
I think a key word here is glorious.
Oh yeah, you just see so much. You get so much more familiar. You put in FaceTime with players. You can before the actual practice ramps up, we get to walk around the field, and so I walk around and today I fist bumped Nasir Greer, one of Wake Forest's safeties. He's coming off a pretty major knee injury last year, and told him, you look good when you're out there. Just that kind of FaceTime, that's building relationships that Wake Forest lets us do, and I'm grateful that we're able to do that.
That's a nice thing. It's refreshing to actually hear you talk about this, because there has been this. It's like a very heavy, wet blanket has been thrown on top of everybody and anything. And to actually be able to get out there and start doing things and living and, practicing and playing and reporting, it's just like, wow, you start looking at stuff and going, well, maybe I took things for granted. So you're just glad that you're out there. So that's neat to hear. Let's get something that we teased in our promos for you being on the show out of the way up front, and maybe create a little bit of a firestorm in something completely outside of sports. You stepped out on a limb with a saw in hand on social media and compared 2 well-known chain restaurant breakfast offerings. And I swear I heard a collective gasp arise across the Southland when you cross this imaginary line. Now, dude, don't mess with people's biscuits. So tell me about this, and who came out the winner, man? If you want to seriously have the saw action going on here.
So first and foremost, I think Bojangles is a really good breakfast spot. I think that the Cajun filet chicken biscuit is, if I could have that every day of the week and my health would stay this way, then I'd do it. I just think Biscuitville is better. I don't know. I have some theories. One of my theories is I can remember back to the first time I had Bojangles. I was a freshman in college. I'd been at Elon for about a month or 2. I'm from Maryland, so I never had Bojangles. I went with a couple North Carolina kids, took me to Bojangles and told me on the whole, 10-minute car ride how it was going to change my life and how this experience was just going to be life-changing and, blah, blah, blah. And I got it and it was like, this is okay. This is not life-changing. I ordered a water and I got a sweet tea. And I guess in the South, some places they might think when you say a water, you mean a sweet tea, but I don't like sweet tea.
Maybe you just look like you needed a sweet tea.
Yeah. Maybe, but it's always been Biscuitville, Bojangles in my mind. I know I'm maybe I'm in the minority, but I'll stand proudly in that minority, because I think that Biscuitville have a couple different options there. I can get a ultimate sausage if I'm feeling really gluttonous, or I can get the hot, spicy chicken biscuit. Their muffins are great. I know Bo rounds are good. I know Bo biscuits are good. I prefer the Biscuitville muffins. That's where I'm at.
I got you. Well, now let me give everybody his direct mailing address so that you can. uh, I hear you. I mean, I'm when it comes to food, I sort of like to bounce around a little bit. So I don't have favorites, and I know this drives a lot of people in my life crazy. It's like, oh, what's your favorite color? I don't have one. No, come on, really? What's your I don't. What's your favorite food? I don't have one. I like pretty much everything, and I like to mix it up. So when you're talking about the differences there, it's because you have a sense of this is what I really enjoy and this is what I like. And maybe that's the background of growing up, some of the things that you were exposed to. So it's all good. And there's a lot of people I know that are going to argue that neither Biscuitville or Bojangles is any good, that it's got to be Popeyes. And then Hardee's jumps in, and then Zaxby's, and it just goes crazy. So I thought that was interesting when I saw that, and I thought, wow, boy, brave guy, going to go out on social media talking about what his favorite biscuits are.
What's social media for, if not for spouting opinions that are going to get a rise out of somebody somewhere?
That's pretty much true. I think that's about all it's really worth, to be honest with you. Let's talk about Wake Forest football, man. We've got a season that's coming up here really quick. And I mean, it is, I'm still having a little bit of a problem processing the time. For me, this doesn't feel like August. The heat does, but it's weird. It's like, we're really going to have football. I mean, that kind of blows me away. Now, this offense, this defense, this team, as far as I can tell, all seriously underrated.
Yeah, it's Wake Forest until they have a 9 or 10 win season, until they really establish themselves in the upper echelon of the ACC. They're always going to be picked in the preseason media poll and in the preseason magazines in that 4, 5, 6 range in the Atlantic. And it's just going to be the way it is. It's just going to be the nature of being little old Wake Forest. That's not the case. That shouldn't be their forecast. They do return a bunch of talent. Their task right now is developing depth behind the talent that they've established over the last year or two. And that's an ongoing process that makes the next 2 to 3 weeks really, really important. And it also makes it really, really important for them to stay healthy. This is not the time that they need to see a couple starters leave the field with injuries, which, my desk is wood, so knock on wood, hasn't happened yet in fall camp. It's just, been some maintenance days for guys that are coming off injuries and that kind of thing. So it's a team with oozing with talent. And we'll see how far it can take them.
This is something that we talk about frequently about Wake Forest. And I think we've brought this up when you were on the show before. When Les stopped in and talked to us about basketball one time, we talked to him about it. You two guys, for the most part, are the sort of that bigger picture that's getting out there about Wake Forest. But when you start going into other markets, and I think even in North Carolina, Wake Forest sort of slips between the cracks or something. The coverage of Wake Forest to me is, I think it's criminal. Honestly, when you talk about just a few seconds ago saying that, they're always consistently like, 5th or 6th or whatever, it's like nobody spends time really taking a look at what's going on. I spend maybe 2 hours of solid, just nonstop research on a team before I'm talking with you. And for me, I look at this team again, and I've seen what Dave Clawson's been doing over the years. It's a slow build. I realize it's okay. It's a smaller school. It may not have that name recognition. All of those things that, everybody says that's the reason. But I've seen Clawson build a program there that, everybody expects at other schools, it takes 2 to 3 years to turn the corner. Well, it doesn't always work that way in today's reality. In this case, he's been there 8 years in 5 consecutive bowl games, and people are still not focused on Wake Forest and what the team can do. And again, what I'm looking at this year, I cannot believe this team is as underrated as it is. I think this is a team that should be in the top 5, maybe 6 of the ACC overall, all the teams. And they're going to surprise some people. Let's talk about somebody that in my eyes doesn't get enough coverage from the media. And it's ridiculous. Sam Hartman, 6'1", 215-pound quarterback. This guy is a baller, and he's got weapons at his disposal this year that blow my mind. Tell us about Sam Hartman and what he's bringing to the game.
Yeah, Sam, it's, the quarterback is always going to be one of the most interesting positions. That's just the nature of football today. But I think Sam is really interesting because we're going to see whether he is what he's been, whether he is what he was last year, which was just kind of a game manager. That has such a negative connotation when it comes to talking about quarterbacks, and I don't mean it that way. I mean it in the way of he, with the exception of a 15-play span in the bowl game, he was not going to lose you a football game last year. He was not going to go out there and throw 11 for 25 for 140 yards and get sacked 7 times and throw 2 picks. Like, that was just not going to be what you got from Sam Hartman. It's really interesting to see if he stays at that level, or if he elevates, if he becomes one of the, if Wake is going to be one of the 5 or 6 best teams in the ACC, Sam Hartman's going to have to be one of the best 5 or 6 quarterbacks in the ACC. Probably the best season for Dave Clawson was either 2017 when they had John Wolford as a senior, and he had, I think, 32 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, or it was the 2019 season when Jamie Newman took them to a 7-1 record in their first ever CFP ranking. And then he loses his 2 best receivers in back-to-back weeks with Scotty Washington and Sage Surratt going down. And they really had nothing behind them. They had some defensive injuries that also cost them. And they limped to the finish with a 1-4 record and finished 8-5. And those are the 2 8-win seasons for Clawson. If Sam can get to the level where John Wolford was playing in 2017, if he can get to the level where Jamie Newman was playing in the first 8 games in 2019, then yeah, then he can start talking about this being a 9 or 10 win team. And there's historic significance to that. I've written already several times that, Wake Forest motto this season is good to great. They've been a good football program. They want to be a great football program. If you're talking about being a great football program, you're usually talking about championships. And there's one big juggernaut in your division that's probably going to keep you from winning a championship. I mean, there's no way around talking about Clemson. And Wake Forest hasn't been competitive with Clemson for the last 3 meetings. At Wake Forest, you can have a great season and not have a championship. That might rub some people the wrong way because they are the most recent North Carolina ACC team to win a conference championship with a 2006 run. the Jim Grobe team, the Riley Skinner team that went to the Orange Bowl. But Wake Forest, that team won 11 games. The next year they won 9 games. Wake Forest has never won 9 games in a football season other than those 2 years. So a 9-win season, finishing second behind Clemson in the Atlantic, I would say that constitutes a great season. And I think to tie this back in, I think Sam Hartman would have to be great for them to get to 9 or 10 wins.
Talk about game manager, and I get where you're coming from with Sam on that. For me, I always think of somebody who is a game manager in 2 lights, and I look at him as being in that upper tier where he can break out. He has the ability to do that. He has the weapons, but he's a linchpin, like in a series of cogs that are moving that team forward. If that linchpin is in place, then that team is moving forward and doing well and will succeed. That's what I see with him. I think I really believe he's set for a breakout season. In addition to Hartman, the QB room kind of looks pretty solid behind him as well, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's I asked Warren Ruggiero, who's the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. I really was anxious to ask him this for a little while now, and I'm glad I got the chance at their media day last week. How do you keep 5 scholarship quarterbacks healthy? Because they've got 5 of them in there, and there aren't too many college football teams that keep 5 around, and or get higher than 5. It's a position where everybody's looking to play. Everybody thinks that, okay, if I'm not the guy, I need to be the next guy. And so if you have 4 guys in the room thinking they need to be next, well, only one of them can be. But yeah, I mean, Michael Kern, this is his 3rd year in the program. He knows the offense in and out. There's actually it's a pretty good battle at this point. They're only 5 practices in, but I don't see much of a separation between Kern and Mitch Griffiths, who came in early in 2020, we got to see him for 5 spring practices, and it's impossible to evaluate a quarterback who early enrolls and is supposed to be a senior in high school, and he's practicing with 21 and 22-year-olds. But yeah, I've been really impressed with what I've seen from Mitch Griffiths early on in this fall camp. And then Wake brought in two scholarship quarterbacks in the same signing class for the first time since 2015. And that's the headline right there in one way. I mean, Billy Edwards Jr. and Santino Marucci, they come in tied together. We'll see how long they're tied together, if it's going to be throughout their Wake Forest career, if one of them is going to transfer. It's going to be interesting to track.
So correct me on this if I'm wrong. Hartman redshirted 1 year. Is that correct? And
2018, I got that right? No, 2018, he was the starter for the first 9. 2019, he had the 4 games redshirted because he only played in 4.
Mm-hmm.
And then last year, eligibility didn't count. So yeah, he's got 3 years left.
Okay. So he has 3 years left. Or if he has a breakout season, he could opt for the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, that's always in the cards. Going into the 2019 season, I would have thought, whoever wins the quarterback battle that spring would be Wake Forest quarterback for the next 2 years. And it didn't play out that way. Jamie Newman transferred after that season. So yeah, I mean, it's something that, once you start putting years and putting probable starters in an Excel chart, then 2 months later, you'll have to completely change it and make a lot of major edits there. So it's something that you never get too far ahead of yourself. But yeah, I think if you're a Wake Forest staffer, you have to at least be aware of the fact that, okay, we have a quarterback who, if he goes out there and takes the ACC by storm, we need to be ready for the possibility that he could jump.
Either way you look at it, actually, it seems like a very good problem to have. So it would be nice to see Sam come back if he has a great year. But if he makes that decision to go ahead and somebody says, hey, you're going to go fairly high, because as we know, we can look around the NFL, there's a need for quarterbacks. Almost every other year they need to reload. Let's look at running backs here. The first time I heard this, I'm going like, I've got to keep a closer eye on CBS. And I'm going like, what? Okay. Christian Beale Smith. He turned heads last year. He put up over 100 yards against the likes of North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Virginia, NC State. That's nothing to sneeze at. And he's fast, really fast. He's bringing something really special to this offense, and he's also got a couple of guys that are in the stable with him. Let's talk about those running backs.
Yeah, Christian, it's been fun to watch Christian grow. I was just talking to him the other day. As a true freshman in 2017, he was in the on deck circle. They were ready to burn his red shirt because that year they had three really good running backs with Matt Colburn, Cade Carney, and Arkeem Byrd. And about halfway into that season, maybe a little more than halfway, Carney and Byrd were both hurt. And Matt Colburn was the only healthy running back. They'd also had a couple other running backs who were hurt in fall camp and in the first couple games. So it was Matt Colburn and it was Christian as a true freshman. And Matt Colburn, the game at Notre Dame, I think played 90 some snaps. He played every offensive snap. Christian didn't have to go into the game. The game at Syracuse is the one that everybody talks about with Matt. I mean, Matt ran for, I think, about 228 yards. They ran, I think, almost 100 plays of offense, and Matt Colburn never came out of the game, which was just unheard of. And Christian just stayed in that on-deck circle. And they redshirted him. And that was 2017 was the last year that the 4-game maximum to retain a red shirt wasn't in effect. So if he'd played even one snap, he was going to burn his red shirt. So they were able to keep the red shirt on him. And we talked to him, and he's been honest with me a couple times about this. He wanted to play in those games. He thought he should have been playing. He thought that he'd prepared all week. He thought he was ready to play. He didn't think that Matt Colburn should have to be out there for 90 snaps and be wheezing and breathing hard. But that's the way that it played out. And Christian has matured a ton since he got to Wake's campus. And he looks back on that now and knows that it was for the best and knows that his confidence stayed high. He knows that he probably would have been overwhelmed. He knows that what he thought then about he should have been in the game is not the way he looks at it anymore. And it's really been fun to see him emerge as a leader in that room. You don't lose a running back like Kenneth Walker III and get better at that position. He would make some plays and he would break through some tackles and run through contact that is rare. That said, they are deep at running back. I mean, they brought in Christian Turner, Justice Ellison. They really liked at the end of last year after Kenneth Walker kind of opted out of the season and entered the transfer portal. They really liked what Justice Ellison brought to the table as kind of Christian Beale Smith's backup. So those are kind of the top three. Those have been the top three in the pecking order. They're waiting on Quentin Cooley, they brought in 3 running backs last year, and Justice Ellison was kind of the last one standing by the end of the year. Quentin Cooley started the year as the number 3 behind CBS and Walker, and he was hurt early. He's had a couple other injury issues that he hasn't practiced yet. Amani Marshall is the 3rd running back that they brought in last year. He has great size. He's about 6'2", 220, 215. He can hit. I think they're waiting to see a little more from him. Try not to be too mean here. He runs with a little too much of his 6'2" frame exposed. He needs to be lower.
Yeah. And
they brought in a freshman running back who, if the position wasn't as deep as it is with those top three guys, with Christian, and Justice, the freshman running back, Will Towns, I'd be telling everybody right now that he's going to play more than the 4 games. He's going to contribute and he's going to help them win, because he looks really, really good. His acceleration is great. His vision is good for a freshman running back. He still might play in more than 4 games if they have an injury. Right now, I would put him in that 4-game max category, but they have a bright future, and that room is really, really young, which is probably the best part of it right now.
Any thought when you're 6'1", 215, you said that? Yeah. It's kind of hard not to be exposed as a running back. I wonder if there's ever been any consideration of putting him into a slot receiver's position or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with Amani, because, you know, I saw him a little bit in high school. His high school is literally 10 minutes from my house. He was just basically a running back. I don't even know that he played any defense. They're a very large North Carolina high school. They didn't need guys going both ways and playing all those snaps every game. It's interesting what'll become of his career, and he's still young. He was coming off an injury. It's probably a little unfair of me to judge him as harshly as I do, but you know, when you come in as one of 3 and one of those 3 is ahead of you and is kind of established that he's going to be either the number 2 or number 3 running back, you know, that kind of dictates your development needs to either get to here, or, you know, you need to go to another school to find opportunities to touch the football.
Right. It's funny you're saying you shouldn't be as hard on him. For me, Conor, that's professional observation. You're not being hard. You see it, you know what it is, you say it. It's just that simple. And that might be a good recommendation from that standpoint. If you find something that works for you, someplace that clicks more, if that's what you want to do. Not encouraging him to do that, but let's go into the receivers, man. An absolute black hole, losing. I mean, there was like 5, I think, wide receivers that were out. And then of course, Surratt opted out. But this year, now we're talking a little different ball game here. Again, we've talked about these weapons so far. Again, Wake Forest seems to have a real stable of wide receivers, people who have the ability to go up, get the ball, and then take it to the house.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out how to replace Donovan Green. That was the big kind of bombshell at ACC Media Day. Before that, I was thinking Donovan Green could be an all ACC receiver this year. I mean, he's got the size, he's got the speed. I mean, he without getting too far ahead of ourselves, I thought he could have a Sage Surratt type season, where Sage in 9 games had 1,000 yards in 2019, maybe 10 games, but anyway, no, it was 9. They're going to have to get a little creative. Jacory Roberson in the slot is the established go-to guy. I mean, that was clear whether Donovan Green was going to be in the lineup or not. Jacory, the Pro Football Focus analytics, the analytics community loves Jacory, and for good reason. He is such a valuable asset on third downs. He's such a good route runner. He is able to make contested catches. He's just a complete package as a wide receiver or as a slot receiver. Taylor Morin, toward the end of last year, moved to the outside, and that's where he's going to probably be unless he's getting slot reps. He knows how to be a slot. It's good to have a little versatility with him. And then really with Donovan out, you're looking to get some contribution from, is it going to be A.T. Perry, who is going into his 4th year in the program, is physically gifted. I mean, he's 6'5", he's about 200 pounds. He can win jump balls. Is it going to be Donald Stewart, a grad transfer from Syracuse who came in last year? The second game of the year, he had 5 catches against NC State. He looked pretty good. He got rolled up on the last drive and had an ankle injury and was really never heard from again. I mean, I was surprised that he was back this year. Then you find out he had an ankle injury, and that's why he wasn't heard from in the last 7 games last season. Or is it going to be Jamal Banks? Jamal Banks was a freshman last year. He didn't have much of an opportunity, but he certainly has the frame and the size to make an impact out there. It's an intriguing position. They need probably at least one of those last 3 guys I mentioned needs to be a guy that they can count on to throw a jump ball or 2 per game to, and have pretty high confidence that they're going to be able to come down with it. It'd help if 2 of those 3 could emerge as that, and they'll be really good if 3 of the 3 emerge like that. But that's a position that really needs to be sorted out before that September 3rd opener.
It's going to be an interesting one to watch too, because there's a lot of talent there, an awful lot. I will tip the hat to whoever is handling the PR and social media for Jacory, because the amount of stuff that I was swamped with alone, promoting him from that NFL perspective was staggering, and I'm like, wow, and I thought, okay, a week's worth, and it just kept coming. So, good job, whoever did that. Nice work bringing it to our attention. All 5 starters are returning on the offensive line. Now that's a plus.
Oh.
That's got to. Oh, okay. Timeout. All right. No.
Yeah. Javionte Nash was another one that was lost for the season.
Oh, okay.
Doing a routine bench press and torn pectoral, I think, was the diagnosis. So
yeah,
he was their starting right tackle last year, and as Dave Clawson said, it's terrible news for the 2021 Wake Forest offensive line, but right now he plans on coming back for 22. So
that's
it's a great grad transfer pickup essentially for the 2022 season and for that offensive line.
Who is stepping up there?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It looks like this is actually it's more of a narrow competition than I thought it would be going into camp, but it looks like it'll either be Devontae Gordon or Spencer Clapp. Devontae Gordon was a class of 20. Let's see. So originally he was a class of 2017 signee, I think. Or recruiting classes throw me off every time. Devontae Gordon was in a class, I think it was class of 17 or 18, and late in his high school career, he had a devastating leg injury that just was horrific, according to Dave Clawson. And he actually gray shirted. I mean, he stayed home. He wasn't able to come to Wake Forest for that fall semester, and he early enrolled the next year. And so since he got to Wake Forest, he's been working his way up. He's kind of been playing catch up to get to, all the guys that he would have been enrolled with at Wake Forest and had to wait to join them. So he's a pretty inspirational story, and so is Spencer Clapp. Spencer Clapp was a class of 2017 guy. He comes from a school that's not too far from Wake Forest. He comes from Eastern Guilford High School, which in a lifetime or two ago, I covered Eastern Guilford High, and I covered Spencer Clapp playing not only football, but playing some baseball. And Spencer's a great guy. He was always that rare high school player that if I was up in the stands covering a basketball game, he would come sit in the stands with me and just talk to me, which is, I can count on one hand the number of kids that would do that and be comfortable talking to a grown-up. Spencer's had some knee problems since he's been at Wake Forest. I mean, the casual Wake Forest fan has probably never heard of Spencer Clapp since signing day because he's never really been in the mix because he's never been able to be healthy for an extended period of time. So this is the first time that he's really been able to stay healthy and stay on the field. And all of a sudden he's in the mix to be a starting tackle in the ACC. It's a big jump, but if you have competition, if you have those two guys pushing each other, and at the same time, if your other tackle is a guy like Zach Tom is one of the best tackles in the ACC. If they're able to bounce things off him and learn from him, that's only going to help.
That's good. Let me encourage every athlete out there. If you're in high school and you know the reporter, go spend some time. Just as indicated here, I can tell you it is well worth it. And who knows what extra insight you may get, and maybe a little extra exposure as well. Yeah, I it's funny that you mentioned that, Conor, because I've got a buddy who works for a regional paper in Virginia who is that way too. He's still covering some high school stuff, and he spends a lot of time talking with athletes from different sports and stuff, and he'll have people come up to him and talk with him. Must be a trustworthy look on your faces or something. I don't know. It's but that I definitely recommend doing that. That is a smart move for a lot of different reasons. Defensive line. If I can do this one without screwing up. So Basham is off to the NFL. And I'm excited to watch him play this year, to be honest with you. I just think that he's going to have a good career. 7 players starting experience return. And that includes 2 transfers, if I'm not mistaken. So one of the things that has always bothered me about Wake Forest in the past is sometimes their defense is just mediocre. I don't want to say it's bad. It's not. It's just mediocre. And so I have been seeing a trend. And I'm thinking, okay, this is part of the Clawson thing. It takes a little extra time to build that small program into something really effective. Talk to us about this defensive line and what these guys who are coming back are going to what difference they'll make on the field this season.
Yeah, so basically, I love talking to Wake's defensive line coach, Dave Cohen. He has a way of putting defensive line terms in such a way that it makes it easy for a guy who's never played defensive line like me to understand. So Dave basically explains it as every college defensive line is either one of 2 things. One is the defensive line that has that one guy who's going to win on just about every third down. He's going to win a one-on-one, or he's going to be double or triple teamed or chipped with a tight end or a running back. I mean, they're going to have that one guy who dictates, you better put your protection over here, or it doesn't matter what play you've called, he's going to blow it up. And that's basically what Wake has had the last 2 years with Boogie Basham. Boogie Basham in 2019 and 2020 was a dominant defensive lineman in the ACC. He had pass rush moves. He had a motor that never stopped. And he was a freak. I mean, just today, Bruce Feldman's list of freaks in college football came out. I think Boogie Basham was in the top 10 of that list last year for being 6'5", 280 pounds and being able to run like a deer.
Yeah.
So that's the one defensive line that Wake Forest is transitioning back to what they were pretty much in 2018, where they don't have that one guy who can be counted on to win every single time. And they're going into a season, and it's not to say one way is better to play defensive line than the other. It's just usually the way things are sorted out. Clemson is always that second defensive line where they have some balance. Now they have 3 or 4 guys that are probably going to win one-on-ones on third downs, but they're Clemson. Wake is going to have a bunch of guys with a ton of experience. It's going to be interesting to see if any of them even approach double-digit sack numbers. I kind of doubt it. I think we'll see a bunch of guys between 4 and 7 sacks. I think that both of their defensive ends replacing Boogie Basham, it's going to be Rondell Bothroyd and Jasheen Davis. Rondell came in as a defensive tackle. He was then moved to kind of a hybrid and was playing some defensive tackle, some defensive end behind Boogie. Now he is a full-fledged defensive end. He is a starting field end, and he is a really good defensive end. He's not a Boogie Basham, but he is really good. Behind him is Jasheen Davis. Jasheen Davis was a recruiting steal a couple years ago. He came in last year and redshirted, and in the spring, I don't think we could talk to anybody for more than a week without hearing about Jasheen Davis playing really well at defensive end. I talked to Rondell Bothroyd earlier today. He told me that in the spring, they have like a wins and losses chart to kind of go back and forth. And Jasheen won every single spring practice between the two of them. Rondell had to tell him, like, that you're not doing that in the fall. And I think it's been a little more Rondell here in the fall. But those two are going to be good. They're going to get some pressure up the middle. They're going to get Miles Fox is probably the name to know as far as which interior guy is going to get sacks. He is in his 7th year of college football. He transferred in from ODU. When you mentioned they had 2 transfers, I had to kind of my brain had to work a little bit to remember that he was a transfer, because it already feels like he's been at Wake Forest forever. Miles, I think, had 10.5 tackles for loss last season, and I think 4 in the game against Louisville. I mean, when he was dominant, and that was the defensive line's first game without Boogie. He had COVID earlier that week, and so that was kind of their initial experience of life after Boogie. Suleiman Kamara has played a ton of football for Wake. He's in the interior. Tyler Williams has played a ton of football. He's a guy that he needs a clean bill of health. He's kind of the injury question mark, it seems like, every year on a weekly basis. But when he's in there and when he's healthy, he can be a very good defensive tackle. The drop end spot, the other defensive end that isn't where they've produced NFL pass rushers, that's Jacory Johns. He was a classmate of Trevor Lawrence in high school. He comes from Cartersville, Georgia. He was better than people realized last year. He just didn't have the numbers to back it up. It's a position that Wake is not necessarily looking for big time tackle for loss and big time sack numbers. So if they get them, they'll take them. But it's more a position of being versatile and flexible and dropping into coverage every now and then, being able to cover the flat, being able to track a running back into the second level maybe. So that's where Jacory comes in. If he grows and improves on his performance last year, that's going to make this defense that's going to help them get to the next level. And then behind him, it looks like Luigi Villain, a Michigan transfer, is probably going to be behind him, but they've got some other options. A guy named Kendron Wayman was a freshman with Jasheen Davis, has come in, and it's an incredibly deep unit. They should be able to rotate as far as I mean, they should be able to line change basically. So it's a deep and interesting unit.
I think what you ended on there, being able to rotate is going to make a huge difference. And when you have the fresh bods out there, which they really haven't had that luxury in the past, not to the degree it seems like it this year.
Yeah.
So, linebackers, 2 starters, but it appears that there's the same level of experience or maybe capability in the linebacking corps. Is that a good picture, or what's going on there?
I mean, they've got 3 right now. They've got 3 who are going to play 2 spots. Ryan Smenda Jr. is going to be the middle linebacker. He's played a ton of football for Wake Forest. The first half of last season, I didn't think he was playing as well as he could be playing. I think he played better as the season went on. You know what you're getting from Ryan. He kind of falls into the same category as Sam. He's got a very high floor, but if he can take the next step, if he can really establish himself as one of the better middle linebackers in the ACC, that's going to really help Wake Forest win some football games this year. They dropped Luke Masterson down to linebacker. He's been all over the place for the last 4 years, basically, but he moves from safety / rover to linebacker. I was really impressed with how quickly he was able to go from looking like a bulky safety to looking like an ACC linebacker. I mean, he shot up to 230 right away. I don't know if he's going to put on any more weight. 230 for an ACC linebacker is still on the lighter end of things, depending on your scheme and that kind of thing. But he at least looks the part right now.
I have a suggestion that you could pass along to him. Go to Biscuitville.
Right. I can give him his order if he needs it. And then Chase Jones is going to be behind those 2. Chase Jones seems to have the flexibility to play either inside or outside linebacker. Then it's a matter of figuring out who's going to be 4 and 5. They've got a guy like DJ Taylor, who all the way back in the first half of 2018 was the starting middle linebacker. Then he had mono that took him out of the second half of that season, and he came back for the Birmingham Bowl and actually had a really good bowl game. And then he suffered a season-ending injury for the 2019 season, just like walking around campus in January of 2019, and hasn't seemed to be the same player since then. They brought in a freshman from Texas, Dylan Hazen, who honestly has a chance to cross that 4-game threshold and play in more than 4 games this year and help them win if he proves up to the task. So yeah, linebacker is a position where depth helps. With Wake, since they only play 2 a game, it's not a position where you're looking at it like, okay, we need to have 5 or 6 of them ready. I think that's their goal, but if they only have 4 of them ready, then I think they can scrape by. But right now, yeah, it's the task of establishing who's behind those top 3.
Let's get into the DBs here before we take a look at the schedule. This looks pretty solid too.
This is probably the deepest area of the team. I mean, talked about the defensive line, but I mean, they've got so many DBs that can help you win. I mentioned Nasir Greer all the way at the start. He's kind of who I would say is the most important one. Wake has to be good at safety. The nature of how fast their offense goes, their defense is going to be on the field a lot. So their defense better have some depth, and especially in the secondary where those guys get worn down trying to run down receivers all game. Nasir is going to be not the determining factor, but he's going to go a long way in determining their safety depth. Everybody's favorite walk-on freshman turned hero, Nick Anderson, is back there. He's now on scholarship. He admitted the other day that he was just an 18-year-old kid out there playing ACC football, and he was pretty small for what he was being asked to do, and he has toned up his body and now looks like a ACC football player. Corner was such a big question mark going into last season. You just didn't know whether Jasir Taylor was going to be able to step up as a full-time starter after being behind Asang Bassi and Amari Anderson for 3 years. He did. And then you also had Kalen Carson as a freshman come in and play really good football. You had Gavin Holmes was on his way to playing really good football and then suffered a season-ending injury on a pick six at Syracuse. They're really deep at corner because they have, Holmes is back, Jasir is back for his COVID senior year. Kalen Carson is back. And then they brought in transfers, Isaiah Wingfield from Harvard and KJ Trujillo from Colorado. They might be able to play 5 corners, and Wake has never been able to play 5. Some years they've barely been able to play 3 corners in games. So to be able to play 5 is huge. And what they're doing with the rover position now, when I first started covering this team in 2017, the rover it was explained to me he was 2/3 linebacker, 1/3 safety. It's basically a third safety on the field at this point. And it's basically a nickel back without actually calling it a nickel back. They've been lining up JJ Roberts, who's actually the 3rd defensive back in the class with Carson and Holmes. So it looks like they went 3 for 3 hitting on players that are able to contribute earlier in their careers. He's been lining up in the nickel. Kobe Davis, who has been through some injury pains in the last couple of years, has been lining up at nickel and looks pretty good. They've got a lot of names. I went through all this and haven't mentioned Travion Red, who was last year's nickel and Luke Masterson wasn't. Travion Red is playing safety now, and he's been a really good football player for them for the last 3 years and should be that again. So yeah, their secondary is stacks up pretty well right now.
Just like in music, nobody wants to hear Nickelback. So that was too cheap. Sorry about that. I couldn't resist. I'm all about the puns. Let's look at this schedule, man. So far as I can see, this looks like a good start. The back end of the schedule is brutal, but if they can get through the front end of the season without any injuries, they're going to take some teams to task. They're going to be clicking. So that last half may not be as daunting as people think it's going to be. Some quick thoughts on these games as I roll through them. ODU.
Yeah, I mean, that's a mystery at this point. Like they have a second-year coach who hasn't coached a game because they opted out of last season. Right. And I think Wake Forest, the early lines were Wake Forest by 5 touchdowns. Yeah, I mean, that should be a tune-up game.
Okay. Norfolk State
is the FCS game, and it's a game you don't want to take lightly, but it's also a game that you're going into it thinking the second half should be getting your backups some time.
Right. Norfolk. Yeah. And you're right. You should never take Norfolk State lightly. Florida State. This is an interesting mix here.
That's when we'll find out what Wake Forest is made of. I think I don't think their first 2 games will be all that competitive. I'll be surprised if they are. And I'll eat some crow if they are. But that Florida State game, the 3rd game, we're going to find out some things, and there's going to be a smidge of bad blood there, at least on Wake's side. Florida State was supposed to come up to Winston-Salem for senior day last season, and
Oops.
that was Wake Forest became the third team that Florida State called and said, we can't play you. So, yeah, I mean, Wake Forest was going through a Friday walkthrough and came off the field to learn that their game the next day had been canceled. That's not as bad as Clemson traveling down there and then having the plug pulled. But yeah, there were some bad feelings on Wake Forest's end with that game being called.
This is the first game that I see as a true challenge at Virginia, because Scott Stadium in Charlottesville has been very kind to the Cavaliers. This I see as being a real battle.
It's going to be interesting because Wake got the better of Virginia last year, but that was really the only game that Brennan Armstrong missed the entire game. And Virginia didn't really have much at quarterback past him. So yeah, that's going to be a tough test. And, it's not the Duke basketball effect of things, but I do always wonder about a team that plays a road game for the first time in its fourth game of the year. And you kind of,
yeah.
Are you a little too comfortable in your home surroundings? And is it going to be a shock to the system to travel and play with some noise?
And next up is Louisville.
I mean, the Wake-Louisville rivalry gets another chapter.
Yeah.
It looked like Wake had the upper hand beating Louisville in 2017 when they had Lamar Jackson coming off the Heisman year, and they put 56 on him the next year in Louisville. And the last 2 years, it's been Louisville. I mean, Louisville put 62 on them and gave them their first loss in 2019. And then last year, Louisville's last game of the year, Louisville didn't have anything really to play for other than it being senior day. Wake Forest was trying to play for some bowl position, trying to secure a winning season, and kind of laid an egg at Louisville. That's a matchup that's going back and forth a little bit, and it'll be really interesting to see who has the upper hand this time.
It's interesting that those two teams have turned into a rivalry. That fascinates me.
Yeah.
And I wonder sometimes, was that before the the playbook gate or
WikiLeaks?
Yeah.
WikiLeaks is the preferred term.
Yeah. All right. Next up is Syracuse, at Syracuse, by the way.
Yeah, Wake went to Syracuse last year and won by, if I'm not mistaken, 30. I think everybody that filled out a preseason ACC poll had Syracuse last in the Atlantic. I don't know what to expect from Syracuse. It feels like a lifetime ago that was a 10-win team, and that was only 2018.
Yeah. I'm going to give this next date to Wake Forest. It's a bye. Then they're going to come out of that bye, and I think this puts them in a good position, to be honest, going to Army West Point, because Army West Point is always a challenge, no matter who you are. But I think coming out of a bye, going into that game, I think this is a good thing.
Yeah, you would think. I've done some research. I don't have the updated numbers off the top of my head, but coming off a bye week is not the advantage that you'd think it is. I think in Dave Clawson's 7 seasons, they might have won 1 or 2 games coming off of an extended break. It's a little perplexing and a little crazy, but then once you look at the trend of college football, it's having that off week is not as much of an advantage as you'd think. And I go back to 2017, Wake had a bye week right in the middle, right? 6 games bye week. And then coming out of that bye week, they played Georgia Tech at Georgia Tech, and it was not a very good Georgia Tech team. I think it was it was one of Paul Johnson's last teams. He kind of thought like, all right, Wake should have the upper hand in this matchup, and they got housed. I mean, it was 42-24, I think. I mean,
Hmm.
there's don't chalk that one up just yet.
Well, I tell you what, if you're interested, we'll decide on a little Biscuitville bet here. Next up is Duke.
Yeah, that's one that Wake and Duke were supposed to play last year. It was a game that got nixed because of Wake's COVID-19 issues there late November, early December. It's a game that honestly Wake probably would have liked to play, given the way Duke looked last year with Chase Bryce. It'll be interesting to see what Gunnar Holmberg is for Duke. He probably should have gotten a little more time than he did last year, but that's an interesting game, and I think Wake has beaten Duke the last 2 times they played, so we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, the last 3 of the teams that will test the mettle of Wake Forest: at North Carolina, at Clemson, at Boston College. This is just brutal. Somebody in Greensboro just said, let's throw them to the let's throw them in the moat and let the Gators eat them. So this is a tough schedule to finish out a season.
Yeah, I mean, Clausen wants to get into November with something to play for, and really 2019 they got into November with something to play for, and they had a rash of injuries, and they were pretty uncompetitive against Clemson, and they lost games to Syracuse. They lost a game to Virginia Tech that they felt like they should have been in. It's a tough stretch to close the season with, but you're going to, that's the nature of being in the Atlantic. You're going to have to play Clemson eventually, and you don't get to do what NC State did last year and just casually miss them with the adjusted schedule.
Yes, things sometimes they go a certain way, don't they? Well, North Carolina should be a really competitive game. I think that's a game that those 2 teams seem to really go at each other, and it seems to be kind of an even field. We'll see. I think both teams have come up in experience and ability, so it should be, Clemson, Death Valley speaks for itself. Boston College also is a team that if the season goes the way I think it's going to go for Boston College, that is going to be a big challenge. And because it's at Chestnut Hill, that's going to make it even that much tougher. But again, as you point out, if you don't have these injuries, this could make all the difference in the world. And if you're playing for something at this point, which looks to me, based upon my counting on my fingers routine here, that Wake Forest will be doing just that.
There is a stat too that might actually work in their favor going up to Chestnut Hill. I think the road team in that series has won something like 7 or 8 in a row. Just this quirky little, stat out there that being the home team in that series has not been a benefit.
Want more ACC sports news and interviews? Make ACCNation.net your homepage or follow us on Google News. Be sure to subscribe to ACC Nation on your favorite podcast or streaming radio platform. While you're there, we'd appreciate a rating and your support through PayPal. Follow us on social media at ACC Nation. And you'll find Will on Twitter at WillsWorldMN, and I'm at ACC The Q. Until next time, cheers.
Score.